Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkanasa Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Louisiana Mound builders. Before we get going, I will be at the Laredo Public Library on McPherson, October 16th, which is a Wednesday. I'll be there from 6:30 p.m. until about 7:45, talking about my latest book, Fort McIntosh and the Paranormal. Stop on by if you're in the neighborhood and get a signed copy. If not, you can go by the Organic Man Coffee Trike, also on McPherson, and pick up one there. I'll bring a few copies of the Laredo Paranormal Research Society along if you want a copy. Something odd is going on here in Laredo. Last week, my wife and I were at the Sam's Club picking up a few things. They had pallets of water stacked all over the area where the drinks are kept. I mean, it was full. Lots of water. My wife said something about how folks must be thirsty here during the summertime. As we moved through the frozen food section, there were more pallets of water piled in the middle of the floor. We laughed about the overabundance of water and kept going. Last Sunday, the story came out that the water supply in South Laredo was a bit nasty, and folks were told they should boil the water before drinking it. We were en route to Sam's for more supplies. At the front door, the greeter asked for my Sam's card. They had stopped doing this last year. There was a sign saying only 4 cartons of water per Sam's member. Now this got us to wondering. Now we always keep water on hand at the house. I don't drink city water. Fluoride is poisonous. That's what they used to give the prisoners in concentration camps in Germany during World War II. Fluoride has a tendency to cause people to not want to do anything. Dumbs them down, if you will. And yet, every city in the United States fluoridates their water. We discussed if we should maybe grab a couple of bottles and decided it might not hurt. We walked towards the back wall where the drinks are kept. The place was full of people all trying to get their 4 cases of bottled water. A lot of them had 6, 8, 12. But they were stopping them at the front door, only letting them take 4. You could feel the anxiety in the air. People were mumbling to each other about how bad it was. Well, the trouble was on the south side of town. The city was saying it was a slight problem, but you should boil the water just in case. Well, people were grabbing bottled water and then leaving. Nothing else, just water. We got a few things and then left. H-E-B, the shelves were completely empty of water. There were actually people waiting by the empty shelves for the folks to bring in more water. As we were driving back home, we got to talking about how a few weeks ago there seemed to be an overabundance of bottled water in town, and now there was none. Kind of like that fake gas shortage a few years ago. Boy, that was fun. This got me to thinking about strange things. Did someone at Sam's Club know ahead of time there would be a water problem and they had shipped in extra to sell? Was this some kind of government test to see how folks would act if a scarce came up? Am I hearing hoofbeats and thinking zebra instead of horses? You know, sometimes there are zebra out there. Now the big question is, how long was this problem with the water going on? It turned out the situation might have never been mentioned if not for a citizen complaining to the state. The state came in and found the problem, and now the city can't figure out why the water is undrinkable or how long it's been going on. I still want to know why Sam's had such a huge supply of water on hand last week. Did someone in the upper management of Sam's know there was a coming problem and decided to get a jump on it? David Subeth suggested this show. I've looked into mound builders up in the north, but never did anything with Indians living in the Louisiana area, so here we go. Louisiana became a French crown colony in 1731. It was ceded to Spain in 1763 after the French and Indian Wars. 1764, the portion of Louisiana east of the Mississippi came under British control. Louisiana reverted back to France in 1800. Under a verbal agreement between King George, the land would never be offered to a third party such as the United States. Well, Spain was trying to get control of New Orleans with the intentions of charging the United States a tax to ship things in and out of the port city. At that time, if you wanted to move anything into the interior of the country, you had to go by the Mississippi. The United States began negotiating with France to buy New Orleans so they could control the entrance to the Mississippi and not have to pay Spain to use it. The U.S. ambassador to France dropped a hint to Napoleon that the U.S. was about to enter into friendly terms with Great Britain, and this was something Napoleon really didn't want. Napoleon was about to begin a war with Great Britain, and he didn't want the United States siding with the Brits. Napoleon turned around and he sold the land to the U.S. in 1803. The trouble with the Louisiana Purchase was nobody actually knew what all was included in it. Things got very complicated for several years before the southernmost parts of Louisiana Purchase and the territory of New Orleans became known as the state of Louisiana in 1812, just in time for the War of 1812. Well, long before Louisiana became a state, Indians had been living there. The folks living in the Americas before Columbus ran into Hispaniola were called mound builders, since they had a propensity to pile dirt up and create huge mounds. Now, some of these mounds were in the shapes of animals, while others were just huge hills. This construction took lasted for about a 5,000-year period. Scientists today say these mounds were for religious ceremonies or to inter their dead. A very few mounds were put in place so the elites could live high above everyone else. One of the best-known mounds are the Cahokia Mounds near East St. Louis, Illinois. This is the largest set of mounds in North America. The mound, thought to be a temple, measures nearly 100 feet high and 975 feet long. The building of mounds has been divided up into 6 different time periods. The first being what is called the Archaic Era. The first mound complex during the Archaic era are found in southeastern Louisiana, The construction of these complexes of mounds is believed to have started way before the pyramids in Egypt. The mounds during this period are assumed to be pre-agricultural mounds or settlement mounds, owing to its location in the floodplains. If you visit coastal communities for the United States, you'll see houses built up on pylons, stilts. This is a precaution against coming floods, which will happen, so you might as well build for them. Back 6,000 years ago, they didn't build houses, let alone houses on stilts. So instead, the locals would pile dirt up in the area of their village. This served as high ground, so their homes would be up out of the floodwater. You'll also see this around some lakes, like in Caddo Lake. Louisiana has more than 700 mound complexes or individual mounds built over the millennia. They include some of the oldest and best preserved such structures in North America. Researchers have studied several ancient earthworks in Mississippi River Delta near present-day New Orleans, and they say that Native Americans, or Indians, knew exactly which places were suitable for their landforms that supported the village and the earthen mounds. They often situated their mounds near resource-rich waterways which could support larger human settlements. You needed food and water enough for hundreds of people. Core samples and excavations reveal that the mound was built in distinct layers, with clay on the bottom, looser sediments piled up in the middle, and then clay on top. Back in the 1800s, the scientists began to say Indians living in the Americas were hunter-gatherers and never really built any long-term structures. This was done to justify what was called manifest destiny. It made running the Indians out of every place east of the Mississippi easier to pull over on people. In the 19th century, manifest destiny was a widely held belief that the United States was destined to settle everything between the oceans. Historian Frederick Merck says this concept was born out of a sense of mission to redeem the old world by high example, generated by the potentialities of the new earth for building a new heaven. Very high and mighty speak for some of these folks. Andrew Jackson, known by some as Old Hickory, was president when this whole idea became popular. Jackson wanted to run every Indian out of East United States. This led to a rift between him and David Crockett, who, after fighting in the Indian Wars, had a change of heart. He thought the Indians had as much right to live anywhere in the U.S. as anyone else. Today, many Indians refuse to do any business using $20 bills since Old Hickory is on them. 10s are just fine, but no 20s. And I'm getting ahead of myself and way off of subject. Back to the 6,000 years ago. Many mound sites have survived in coastal Louisiana due to their careful construction methods and location. To build a mound, you would have to first pick a location. You wanted to be close to water, but not where the water would wash away your construction. A nice clay layer would have to be found to support the mound. The people deciding where to build would pick the highest ground in the area. It may only be a few feet higher than the surrounding land, but during a flood this was far better location. Dirt had to be dug up and hauled to the build site. This would have taken lots of walking back and forth since there were no deep depressions near the mound site. There's no evidence that the land, the dirt, used to raise the mound up came from around the mound itself. Dirt would be collected from just a few feet down, but from miles in every direction. There were no wheelbarrows, no carts with wagons, no horses to help carry the load. Each person would have a grass basket filled with dirt, and then they'd walk back and forth all day, every day. Once the mound was high enough to satisfy the guys in charge, clay had to be hauled from all around the area. If you've ever dug fence posts or tried digging a ditch in an area full of clay, you'll know how much work this would be. The locals didn't have sharp steel shovels to cut through the hard soil. The clay had to be removed from the ground, carried to the mound site, then packed back into the sides and the top. This created a water-resistant shell over the entire hill. Now keep in mind, you needed a big enough mound for people to live. You could build one great big mound or several small mounds all in one area. Of course, the head honcho would get the tallest mound. This makes my back hurt just thinking about it. Now, the job wasn't finished yet. Vegetation grew up all over the surface of the mound. This was to help stabilize the dirt covering the clay. Years after the construction had begun, the Indians began putting their villages in place. Some of these sites were only used seasonally, like winter Texans only in Louisiana. Is there such a thing as a winter Louisianan? Dave, if you're listening, let me know. As many as 500 people lived at Grand Calou, which is close to the Gulf of Mexico. This mound was started around 1,000 years ago, and the folks that built it lived there for about 400 years. Some mounds also served ceremonial functions. What is surprising is that Indians built mounds in just about every state in the Union. According to some researchers, there are Indian mounds in at least 33 states. How many mounds haven't been discovered or was destroyed in the name of progress, well, we don't know. People think that with modern technology, every square inch of the country has been examined. And not even close. There are vast stretches of land that have never been looked at for signs of mound building. And there are cities built on top of ancient Indian mounds. After the Revolutionary War, soldiers were paid with land. As settlers began moving across the country, building farms to raise their families, no one was much interested in why that one piece of land was higher than the rest. If there was a mound in an inconvenient location, it was simply removed. The Grand Calou Mound was abandoned about 1,000 years ago. The scientists believed this was due to salt water inundating the area and causing crops to no longer grow. One day, the guy in charge said, "This place isn't nearly as nice as it used to be," and the whole village packed up and left. A few seconds ago, I said that they'd built it 1,000 years ago. No, they had built it about 1,400 years ago, and they left 1,000 years ago. Seeing as no one living there at the time had spent years toiling to carry baskets of dirt to pile up for the mound, I can see how this could be accomplished. Nobody had a whole lot of sweat equity in the mounds. The oldest Indian mounds on this side of the planet are in the northeast part of Louisiana at Watson's Break in Monroe, Louisiana. There are a group of mounds built in an oval with dirt piled up making a connection with each of the mounds. Some of the mounds were built by reshaping existing geological formations, but they all were worked on to form the existing shapes. The oval consists of about 72,000 square yard area, or about 15 acres. Some of the mounds are just a few feet high, while others are about 2 stories. There is no evidence anyone ever lived in or on any of these mounds. The area was well away from any floodplain, so the reason for all the work of shaping and connecting these mounds is lost to history. As archaeologists study the mounds, they discover a few consisted of dirt piled up on trash heaps. The folks living there 6,000 years ago placed all their discarded items in one place and then covered it with dirt. Once a pile was big enough, a new trash pile was started. This explains a few of the mounds, but not the rest, or why someone went to the trouble of piling up dirt in between the mounds to create a pattern. A close study of the artifacts found under the mounds show the Indians living there didn't have any contact with people living in other parts of the area. All the items found were locally sourced. The pottery was made from local clay, and the arrowheads were made from flint from the area. The folks living there stayed for a few years, built the mounds, and then moved on, looking for greener pastures. Not all of the mounds were created for the same reason. Some mounds were built for living, while others were there to house the dead. If you had some great leader that you wanted to memorialize, it was a common thing to bury them under a huge mound of dirt. Up in the northeast corner of Louisiana is a mound site with a catchy name. It's called the Poverty Point Indian Mounds. A few miles outside of the town of Delhi, along the banks of the Macon Bayou, this is where the 19th century farm owned by Philip Gere was settled in 1832, along with his wife and kids. He bought the land in 1843, and in 1851 his plantation became known as Poverty Point or Hard Times Plantation due to the amount of work involved and how low of a yield it returned. Well, 3,000 years before Gere had bought the land, it was home to a group of Indians that had built a huge mound complex. Indian inhabitants moved by hand about 981,000 cubic yards of dirt to construct 5 earthen mounds, as well as a set of 6 nested semi-elliptical earthen ridges and a large flat plaza. Archaeologists estimate that an equal amount of earth was moved in preparing the landscape prior to the construction. A 6th mound was added by another group of people in around 700 AD, or about 1,800 years after the original group had started things. The Poverty Point inhabitants imported great quantities of raw material, like stones, over great distances. The Macon Ridge, where the mounds were built, had no natural stones. Everything had to be hauled in by hand, since pack animals weren't here yet. 78 tons of rocks and minerals were carried from up to 800 miles away to Poverty Point by hand. Some of these materials were used to make tools and other items. Most mainstream scientists still hold that the site was built by hunter-gatherers who didn't have the knowledge or the ability to build anything so complex. I'm not saying it was aliens, but somebody built the place using advanced calculations and geometry. I am of the opinion the Indians were a lot more educated than most educated people in universities give them credit. There's nothing as stupid as some smart people. Poverty Point's centerpiece is its collection of earthworks built during a 600-year period, or what today would be considered 25 generations. Its concentric half circles measure 4 to 6 feet high in places, have an outside diameter of 3/4 of a mile. Mound A, commonly known as the Bird Mound, is one of the largest in North America. Everything about the earthen structures at Poverty Point suggests a concerted effort to build a massive residential and a ceremonial center that had no rival in terms of scale and size. Mound A, or the Bird Mound, is believed to be an effigy mound constructed in the shape of a bird in flight, flying due west. Today, the mound is 72 feet high and 600 by 800 feet wide. Scientists believe that about 3,000 years ago, erosion, or the structure was a lot bigger, but due to erosion, it has washed away. They think that the mound was over 100 feet tall at one time. It was built entirely by hand by hunter-gatherers, without the advantage of domestic pack animals. This amounts to over 300,000 cubic yards of dirt, carried in well over 15.5 million 50-pound baskets from the barrel pit behind it. That would amount to about 18,000 dump truck loads of dirt. And the most amazing thing of all, archaeologists believe that Mound A was built from within 30 to 90 days. Core samples taken from the mound show no evidence of grass or vegetation sprouting within the mound, nor was there evidence of leaching from rainfall within the mound or any residue left from earthworms, grubs, mold, or any of the other boring animals. That means that the mound was built in one continuous episode over a very short period of time during one season. A lot of people don't realize it, but most scientists agree that the Great Pyramid of Giza was built in a 20-year period of time. I forget the exact calculations, but I believe somebody said that they would have to cut a stone, move it, and put it in place every 30 seconds or something along those lines. Some ridiculous number. Well, one day, the king or the chief of the tribe stood up and said, "I want a huge pile of dirt right there." Well, maybe it was more like, we need to honor our gods and look at the stars, and in order to do this, we need a giant mound to ascend and perform ceremonies. With no record of why or how, it's all just guesswork. It is believed the site was a ceremonial center that was once home to hundreds, perhaps thousands of people, as well as a trading hub unmatched by any in North America at the time. This was surmised since the folks who built the place left no written records. People lived on the eastern ridges. Excavations have revealed post molds, which amount to stains in the soil caused by decomposing wooden posts, which are more than likely the remains of houses. These dwellings were wattle and taub construction. The walls were formed by a woven framework of cane and sticks, and this was covered in mud, kind of like adobe. During the late Archaic, most people lived in small groups. The size of the earthen ridges, which was where the habitants lived, may have housed at least several hundred residents. Now, that doesn't sound like a small group to me. In the 43-acre plaza, defined by the eastern C-shaped ridges, are the remains of massive post holes that were set in circles running to as much as 213 feet in diameter. Now, some of the people looking at the circular construction say it resembles an American version of Stonehenge. The plaza could have been used as a meeting place. If you had a few hundred people all needing to attend, some folks have speculated that it was used for astronomical observations. If it was astronomical, then what did the inhabitants need to know? With no crops to tend, was it used to tell them when it was time to move to a different location? It is speculated that the people that built the mounds only lived there part-time, like seasonal. They would come in the wintertime and move on in the summer. And with that, I am going to take a brief pause, play a couple of commercials, drink some coffee. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Did you hear a bump in the night and you think it just might be a ghost? Contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. That's the LPRS for all your otherworldly needs. Are you taking care of your skin, or are you going to wait and see how time treats you? Take care today by contacting Lourdes James, Independent Beauty Consultant, at 956-723-3019. Don't let time get the best of you. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Back in 1776, someone said, "Give me coffee or give me death." And if that's how you feel, you should be at the Organic Man Coffee Truck. They make coffee the right way, one delicious cup at a time. 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. Coffee, the stuff dreams are made of. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to. And welcome back to the show. I am very curious as to just exactly who it was that came up with the concept that we all needed an extended warranty on our vehicles. I tried to explain to these numbskulls one time that my pickup has over 230,000 miles on it, and as soon as I said that, they hung up. I'm really getting tired of hearing from these folks, though. They send me emails, they call my home phone, they call my cell phone, they try to get me to buy an extended warranty on an old beat-up pickup truck. One guy, when I didn't answer the phone, left a 10-minute voicemail, which I immediately deleted. Do these folks really think somebody's going to buy these things? I guess somebody is, but boy, is it turning into a giant pain in the butt. Anyway, back to the mound builders. The idea as to what was going on at Poverty Point was attained by digging through the area and uncovering things that had been left behind. One person's trash is a gold mine to an archaeologist. When it was time to leave, the locals didn't leave behind anything useful. What was left was broken pottery, animal bones, and trash. What they didn't leave behind were any human remains. No bodies were uncovered during the archaeological investigations. The food remains found consisted of nuts, persimmons, fish, deer bones, and grapes. There was no evidence of farming being done around the site. This led to scientists to believe the folks living there foraged for food instead of growing it. They assumed, and you know what happens when you assume. In recent years, the theory that the fire pits and other items thought to be used for cooking had come under intense debate, and more recent discoveries linked this site to the copper-producing region of the Great Lakes, and has led some scholars to theorize that what was really going on at Poverty Point was actually the refining of copper for trade goods, the theory being that raw copper was brought down from Michigan during the summer months and then refined for manufacture and trade during the winter in the warmer climate of Louisiana. Why Poverty Point was abandoned remains unanswered. Once the builders had done what they wanted to do there and moved on, a second group moved in. The second group of Indians came along around 700 AD, and they reused a small part of the site. They added a mound of their own and stayed on for some time before moving away as well. Nobody used the mound complex until the land was bought and used for farming in the 1800s. There are a few uses for mounds. Some are used for burial. Some are used as platforms to elevate special buildings or temples. Others, such as shell mounds in Florida, are ancient trash heaps. Yet Poverty Point stands apart. With no human remains or heaps of shells, archaeologists assume that these were symbols of power and wealth. And here's a mystery for you. Much of what is known about Poverty Point comes from the eclectic artifacts found under the soil and collected by the archaeologists. Any objects that had been made of wood or other organic materials, say canoes or fish nets, the things that were used in day-to-day life, were left on the ground and just dissolved into the mud. These items could have told about what the people living here 3,000 years ago had traded and used daily. There are plenty of stone and clay artifacts that help tell the story. Intricate owl designs carved from red jasper stone and the ceramic human figures were found all over the dig sites. These carvings tell that art was important to the ancient people, and the images may have held spiritual significance. If you're spending most of your time trying to put food on the table, to sit down and carve a bunch of statuettes shows time was not as short as it in some tribes. Rocks and minerals found in the mound site have been shown to have come from as far away as present-day Iowa and the Appalachians. Water tied these routes together. Like our modern-day highway system, boat travel along the Mississippi River and its tributaries facilitated the movement of people and materials. I always get a kick out of how some scientists say that the folks living in Egypt could never have met the folks living in South America because there's water in the way. Think about the people that set sail and arrived in Rapa Nui 12 to 14,000, 12 to 1,400 years ago. They had set sail from the Polynesian islands using whatever navigation ability they had. They sailed 2,300 miles in canoe and then built huge monuments facing back the way they had come. All the moai found along the shoreline of Easter Island are facing inland, except for the 7 statues of Ahu Nau Nau, which are all facing back towards the island where they originated. This, combined with the Polynesian legend that says a long time ago, like about 1,200 years in the past, the king of the Polynesian islands had 7 sons who didn't get along. He sent them away on a long voyage until they could learn to live together. A long voyage of, say, 2,300 miles? If the Polynesians could do it, I think that the Vikings and the Egyptians could have sailed the 2,000 miles from Africa to South America. This will have to have been another show. Let's get back to the Louisiana Mound Builders again. Pottery is not abundant at Poverty Point. This could be due to the people living there were careful enough to not break things and then throw them in the trash. This is why all the pottery you see in museums has been glued back together. If you have a cooking pot or a serving bowl, you take it with you when you left, because these things were valuable. The people living in this area were among the first in the lower Mississippi Valley to make earthen vessels. They also made many other objects of fired earth or clay, such as Poverty Point objects and figurines. Stone was more popular than clay for making vessels. And not just any stone. A soapstone from Georgia and Alabama quarries was frequently used, and some pieces were decorated with birds and panther signs. The soapstone bowls were highly valued, and this was discovered when broken stone bowls were found that had been repaired and reused, some several times. A clay pot that broke went into the trash heap and a new one was fired. The archaeologists think some broken stone artifacts were turned into pendants and beads. A sandstone was also used to form vessels. Magnetite was used for fishing. The Indians would take small magnetite stones and shape them by rubbing the stone with abrasive materials. Then the stones were tied to the edges of net to pull the nets down to the bottom of the rivers. A magnetite comes from Arkansas, so the folks of Poverty Point had trade with people living north of them as well. After building the mounds and working the area for hundreds of years, the Indians packed their things and left. Some mounds are now located in neighborhoods. Paragod Mound is in the backyard of a $1 million home. At one time, the tribe living there had buried one or two of their people, and then constructed a good-sized mound to commemorate their passing. Along come some developers, and the mound winds up being belonging to the home of somebody's house. Americans considered mounds as part of a highly refined culture for more than 3,000 years that was comparable to many of the great civilizations. The mound-building people shared similar culture and belief systems. It is from the study of the mounds that information of the rich cultural history is known to the world today. The entire southeast and midwestern region of the United States once were home to a close network of villages of mound-building people, further connected by larger mound-building cities, such as the Mississippian culture that survived for more than 1,000 years. In the 16th century, the mound builders came in contact with the Spanish invaders, and the long tradition of mound building came to an abrupt end. In the 1800s, reports surfaced of the discovery of very large skeletal remains in the burial mounds of North America. These skeletons were described as reaching 7 to 8 feet in length, and on more than one occasion there was the discovery of skeletons spanning 9 to 11 feet in length, and having very large skulls, gigantic lower jaw bones. Some of these skeletons had double rows of teeth. The 19th and early 20th century newspapers frequently ran stories of gigantic skeletons found throughout the country. The following report was from Portsmouth, Ohio, and it was run in the New Herald on January 3rd, 1893. It says, "Bridge carpenters on the North and West Railroad found a gigantic skeleton while excavating 3 miles east of Portsmouth. The skeleton measured 7 feet 4 inches. In the 1880s, the Eastern Mound Division of the Smithsonian discovered a number of gigantic skeletons in their wanton destruction of North American burial mounds and the bodies in them. The 12th annual report of the Bureau of Ethnology documents numerous gigantic skeletons found by Smithsonian's agents. Near the original surface of the mound, laying at full length upon its back, was one of the largest skeletons discovered by the Bureau agents. The length is provided by actual measurement being between 7 and 8 feet. In the center of one mound, and 3 feet below the surface, was a vault, 8 feet long and 3 feet wide. In the bottom of this lay a skeleton fully 7 feet long. The length from the base of the skull to the bones of the toes was found to be 7 feet 3 inches. It is probable, therefore, that this individual, when living, was 7.5 feet high. These were all reports made by Smithsonian's agents. I visited a few Indian mounds. I got to see Cahokia some time ago. By the time we were there, all the unexplainable skeletons had been removed. Well, our dad had a thing for driving around the country and stopping at some obscure locations. At one site, we did see a skeleton that had been found near a cave. The skeleton was over 7 feet tall, and it had red hair. Well, recently the skeleton was seized by the government under the premise of returning it to its descendants. Well, any descendants would then have to prove that this was one of theirs, but that was how things are done. Over 7 feet tall with red hair. Haven't seen too many Indians with red hair, but I haven't really seen all of them yet. There has been a major cover-up by Western archaeological institutions since the early 1900s. The cover-up was started to make folks believe that America was first colonized by Asian people who migrated across the Bering Strait 15,000 years ago. The Bering Strait Bridge is no more than a theory put in place by someone who wanted to say where the Indians had come from. Indian legends say they have been here for thousands of years and did not come from Asia. The Hopis say they came up from below, while the Zuni say they came from the stars. There are thousands of burial mounds all over America, and hundreds of thousands of mounds used for unknown purposes, which most Indians will say were there a long time before their ancestors came to the area. One story I have read says that the Smithsonian sent out agents to scour the countryside and destroy anything that might show Indians were anything more than hunter-gatherers who had no claim to the land they lived on. This is from 2014. A U.S. Supreme Court ruling has forced the Smithsonian Institution to release classified papers dating from the early 1900s that prove the organization was involved in a major historical cover-up of evidence showing giant human remains in the tens of thousands had been uncovered all over America and were ordered to be destroyed by high-level administrators to protect the mainstream chronology of human evolution at the time. Well, document classification didn't begin in this country until 1917. So the documents might not actually be classified as being secret, but this doesn't mean there aren't huge files filled with paperwork that was kept from the public. It's called semantics. Show us your classified files. Oh, we don't have any classified files. This isn't saying they don't have files that are secret, just not classified as being secret. That 7-foot-tall red-headed skeleton was real, and it was seized by the government. Winsboro, Louisiana. Skeletons of a race of giants who averaged 12 feet in height were found by workmen engaged in building a drainage project in Crowville. There were about 60 skeletons found laying in various positions. It is believed they were killed in prehistoric fight, and that the bodies lay where they fell until they were covered with alluvial deposits due to flooding of the Mississippi River. No weapons of any sort were found, and it is believed these giants must have used wooden clubs or other weapons that deteriorated over the years. The skulls were perfect state of preservation, and some of the jaw bones were large enough to fit around a child's body. Jim Vieira is one of the key people who began uncovering hundreds of newspaper accounts of giant skeletons after he became intrigued by his visit to stone chambers found primarily in the northeastern states. To date, Vieira has pulled together some 1,500 accounts from newspapers and books published in the 18 and 1900s. If you'd like to know more about this, read the book Giants on Record by Jim Vieira and Hugh Newman. I have a copy, and it's well worth perusing. When Linda Godfrey was on back in July, she talked about how some dogman sightings take place near Indian mounds. I tried searching to see if any of the Louisiana mounds had any relation to dogman or rougarou sightings, but I couldn't find any reports. Well, what with over 700 mounds scattered about the state, it would be difficult to not be near a mound, so there just might be something to it. Mounds can be found in just about every state in the Union. Some will never be found because the dirt was scattered about the land as people built farms and homes. What the heck is a homes? This is what happens when I don't get enough coffee. Some will never be found because the dirt was scattered about the land as people built farms. Oh, now I've got that word stuck in my head. Some will never be found because the dirt was scattered about the land as people built farms and homes where the Indians used to live. How many of these mounds were here long before the Indians, we might never know. Don't hold your breath hoping someday the government will come out and tell us who built some of these giant dirt structures. They won't even tell us who shot Kennedy. As for why the giant skeletons were rounded up and secreted away, once again, someone wants all the information for themselves. Maybe they're trying to build an army of giants and they need the DNA to do it. What possible reason could there be for scientists to insist giants never roamed the earth? Look at the stories in the Bible to begin with. Then there were all the Indian legends of giants that ran around killing and eating people. Makes you wonder about things that went on back then. As for scientists trying to make this part of history go away, think about it. If you built your career saying Indians lived this one way, and they were all from Asia, then some guy comes along saying Indian legends say different. You've heard people say this will rewrite history. If you rewrite history and the scientists are all proven to be wrong, then they'll all have to go out and get real jobs trying to recreate their former standing among society. In just 2 weeks, the Texas Bigfoot Research Center will be hosting the original Texas Bigfoot Conference, October 18th and 19th, 2019, in Jefferson, Texas. If you're in Laredo, Jefferson is just a little hop, skip, and a jump up Highway 59. It's about 550 miles north of here. Just keep driving until you're almost into Texarkana and turn right. Okay, it's quite a long drive, 550 miles, but we are in Texas, so it's just a short ways up the road. Established in 2001 as the original annual Bigfoot Conference in Texas by the Texas Bigfoot Research Center. The confirmed speakers this year will be James Bobo Fay and Cliff Barackman from the hit TV series Finding Bigfoot. Lyle Blackburn, author, musician, film producer, and cryptozoologist, will be on hand. Ken Gerhardt, cryptozoologist and author, often featured on various TV programs. You may have seen Ken on that TV series Missing in Alaska. He's also been on Monster Quest, Mystery Quest, dozens of TV shows. Chester Moore has worked as a wildlife journalist since he was 19 years old. He is editor-in-chief of Texas Fish and Game, and he's the host of the More Outdoors Radio. Shelley Covington, Montana, is a native Texan known as a wildlife and wilderness enthusiast with a passion for conservation and preservation. She's also looking for Bigfoot. Friday night, there is a meet and greet with a catered dinner. This is where you get to talk one-on-one with the folks speaking at the conference. From 8:30 to 10 p.m., there will be a special presentation by Cliff and Bo. On Saturday, October 19th, is the main event. It will be from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m., followed from 6 to 10 with a catered barbecue dinner by Riverport Barbecue. You haven't had barbecue if you've never had Riverport Barbecue. The last time I ate there, I can't eat at a barbecue joint anymore unless it's Riverport. A Saturday night from 8 to 9 p.m., there will be a special presentation by Lyle Blackburn. He'll be talking about the Fouke Monster and the Boggy Creek updates. If you're interested, go to eventbrite.com/e/2019-Texas-Bigfoot-conference-tickets to purchase your tickets. Don't wait until the last minute. They sell out every single year. The last time I was there, people were waiting in the lobby, hoping that others would not show up so they could hopefully buy their seats. It's well worth attending. I highly recommend it. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell your friends. I could always use a larger audience base. And if you like reading, you go to Amazon.com where you can find all of my books. My latest being the Fort McIntosh and the Paranormal. What with Christmas just around the corner, books always make for good gifts. People get them, they don't have to break them, you don't have to plug them in, they don't use any batteries. Think about it. Every time, every Christmas, every birthday, my nieces, my nephews, they're going to get books. I hope they enjoy them. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say murder 3? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.